At 7:42 p.m. on a Friday night, my husband raised a champagne glass in my living room and told 36 people that he had given my house to his mother. Not sold. Not rented. Not discussed. Given. His mother, Diane, stood beside my fireplace with one hand pressed against her chest like she had just received a miracle. The pearls around her neck caught the light from the chandelier I had saved 8 months to buy. Behind her, above the mantel, was a framed photo of my grandmother, Ruth, the woman who had helped me buy that house before I ever met Mark. Mark smiled like he had done something beautiful. "To Mom," he said, lifting his glass higher. "After everything she sacrificed for this family, she deserves a real home. And Amelia and I are happy to give her ours." The room exploded with applause. His aunt clapped first, then his brother, then his cousins. Somebody near the kitchen said, "That's so generous." Another person whispered, "Finally, finally," as if I had been standing in the way of justice, as if I had stolen something from Diane by living in the home I paid for. I stood near the hallway holding a tray of lemon bars no one had touched. The metal edge pressed into my fingers so hard it left a red line across my skin. No one looked at me. Not one person. They were all looking at Diane, who had already started crying into a napkin. Then she turned toward me and smiled. It was not a grateful smile. It was not even a surprised smile. It was the smile of a woman who believed she had finally won. Mark crossed the room and put his arm around my waist like I was part of the performance. "Say something," he whispered through his teeth. I looked at him. "Mark," I said quietly, "what did you just do?" His smile tightened. "Don't start," he murmured. "Not tonight." Diane stepped closer before I could answer. "Sweetheart," she said, loud enough for the nearest relatives to hear. "A good wife supports her husband when he honors his mother." His brother Evan laughed from the dining room. "Relax, Amelia," he said. "It's still in the family. Still in the family." Those 4 words hit harder than the announcement. Because for 5 years, that house had not been the family's. It had been mine. Mine before the wedding. Mine before Mark. Mine before Diane ever walked through the front door and called my kitchen too plain for entertaining. Mine before she started leaving furniture catalogs on my counter with pages folded down. Mine before Mark began saying things like, "Marriage means sharing," and "My mom doesn't have anyone else," and "It's just paperwork." I set the tray down on the console table. My hands were shaking but my voice was not. "Did you sign something?" I asked. The room softened into silence. Mark's eyes flicked toward his mother. Diane's smile faded by half an inch. That was the first crack. Mark gave a short laugh. "We don't need to do this right now." "No," I said. "I think we do." He leaned closer. "You're embarrassing me." That almost made me laugh. After everything he had just done, I was the embarrassment. Diane lifted her chin. "The papers will be handled Monday. Mark has already spoken to someone." Someone. That was when I understood. They had not checked. They had not verified. They had not read the deed. They had believed the same lie for so long that they mistook it for law. And standing in the middle of my own living room, surrounded by people who thought they were watching me lose everything, I realized something strange. I was not scared anymore. Because what Mark did not know, what Diane had never bothered to ask, and what every person in that room was about to learn, was that my husband had just given away a house he had never owned. Not a room. Not a wall. Not even a brick. And the proof was already on its way. 2. Before everything broke. My name is Amelia Hart, and I was 34 when my marriage ended in the living room of the house I bought before I ever wore Mark's ring. I was not rich. I need to say that first because people hear house and deed, and imagine a woman with family money, perfect hair, and no real problems. That was not me. I worked as a pediatric occupational therapist at a clinic outside Portland. My days were full of tiny sneakers, weighted blankets, frustrated parents, insurance forms, and children who cried because the fluorescent lights were too loud. I loved my job, but it did not make me wealthy. The house came from 3 things: 10 years of saving, 1 small insurance settlement after my grandmother's accident, and the last gift she left me in her will. My grandmother Ruth was the closest thing I had to a safe place growing up. My mother loved conditionally. My father loved quietly, which often felt the same as not enough. In my childhood home, every feeling had to be defended. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I needed help, I was needy. If I succeeded, I was lucky. If I failed, I was proof of everything they had warned me about. But Grandma Ruth was different. She listened. She remembered. She made soup when I had exams. She mailed me $20 bills taped inside birthday cards with little notes that said, "Buy something useless." Joy matters too. When she died, I was 27. I found out later that she had left me enough to cover a down payment if I was careful. Not a mansion. Not a luxury property. A narrow blue-gray house on Cedar Hollow Lane with peeling porch paint, a cracked back step, and a maple tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every October. I loved it immediately. The first night I slept there, I did not even have a bed. I slept on an air mattress in the living room under a thrift store blanket while rain hit the windows. The radiator knocked all night like something alive. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. The bathroom door would not close unless you lifted it with your knee. And I cried anyway. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in my life, nobody could tell me to leave. That house became proof that I had survived things no one apologized for. I painted the kitchen sage green. I sanded the floors myself and cried over splinters. I planted lavender along the front path because Grandma Ruth kept dried lavender in her dresser drawers. I turned the spare room into a reading room with a yellow chair by the window. Then I met Mark. He was charming in a quiet way. Not flashy. Not loud. He worked in commercial sales, wore navy sweaters, and always seemed slightly embarrassed by attention. On our third date, he brought me a used copy of a book I had mentioned once. I remember thinking, he listens. That thought became dangerous later. Mark made me feel chosen in a way I had always wanted to feel chosen. He remembered my coffee order. He noticed when I was tired. He held my hand on the anniversary of my grandmother's death because he knew the date still hurt. When he moved into my house after a year and a half, he said, "I don't want you to feel like I'm taking over." I believed him. When he proposed in the backyard under the maple tree, he said, "This place feels like us." I believed that too. We married in a small courthouse ceremony with 12 guests and bad weather. Diane cried during the vows, but not because she was happy. She cried because Mark had not chosen the church she wanted. That was my first warning. I ignored it. I told myself every family had tension. Every mother struggled to let go. Every marriage required compromise. I did not understand yet that Diane did not want compromise. She wanted control. And Mark, no matter how sweet he seemed when we were alone, had spent his whole life confusing obedience with love. 3. The family favorite. Diane Mercer had 2 sons, Mark and Evan. But she only had one child she worshipped. Evan was the favorite. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it out loud. Evan was 31, unemployed every winter, between opportunities every spring, and somehow always driving a newer car than anyone else at family gatherings. He had started 3 businesses, all funded by Diane, all dead by the second tax season. Mark paid the bills. Evan received the speeches. At Diane's Thanksgiving table, Mark could fix her gutters, pay her electric bill and pick up her prescriptions, and she would say, "Thank you, honey," without looking up. Evan could bring store-bought pie, still cold in the plastic container, and Diane would beam like he had catered the whole meal. "My Evan has such a generous heart," she would say. Mark would smile into his plate. I noticed that smile early. It was small and trained. The smile of a child who had learned not to ask why love skipped him. First, I felt sorry for him. Later, I realized pity can blind you. Diane did not dislike me in the beginning. She studied me. The first time she came to my house, she walked from room to room touching things without asking. She ran her finger along the windowsill. She opened the pantry. She stared at the hallway bathroom tile. "It has character," she said. Her tone made character sound like mold. Mark laughed nervously. "Amelia's done a lot with it." Diane looked at me. "You bought this alone?" "Yes," I said. "With your salary?" I felt Mark stiffen beside me. "With savings and help from my grandmother's estate," I replied. Diane's eyes moved to the framed photo on the mantel. Grandma Ruth in her blue cardigan, smiling like she knew a secret. "How fortunate," Diane said. After that, she started making little comments. Not insults big enough to confront. Just paper cuts. At dinner, Amelia is very independent. Some men like that. At Christmas. I suppose separate finances are modern. When Mark mentioned repairs, well, if Amelia owns the house, I'm sure she has it under control. The word owns always came out sharp, like it offended her. Diane valued image above everything. Her church friends, her garden club, her Facebook photos, her family reputation. She liked polished wood, monogrammed towels, and sons who showed up when summoned. My house bothered her because it was something she could not claim. It was not inherited from her family. It was not bought by her son. It was not chosen by her. It was not decorated to impress her friends. It was mine. That made it a threat. Mark never defended me directly. He translated. She didn't mean it like that. She's from a different generation. She's just worried about me. The first time Diane called my house Mark's place in front of relatives, I corrected her gently. Our place, I said. Diane smiled. Of course. Later in the car, Mark sighed. Was that necessary? I looked at him. She said it was your house. She knows what she meant. What did she mean? He gripped the steering wheel. Can we not make everything a thing? That became our pattern. Diane pushed. I noticed. Mark minimized. I swallowed. Then one Sunday after lunch, Diane stood in my kitchen and said, "A man needs to feel like the head of his home." I was rinsing plates. Mark and I make decisions together. She laughed softly. That's adorable. Mark was sitting at the table scrolling his phone. He said nothing. I looked at him waiting. Still nothing. That silence hurt more than Diane's words. Because cruelty is ugly, but silence gives it permission. By our 3rd year of marriage, Diane had a key for emergencies. Evan stored boxes in our garage for a few weeks. Diane's mail started arriving at our address because her apartment had delivery problems. Mark began asking if his mother could stay over after medical appointments, after church events, after arguments with neighbors. I said yes more than I wanted to, because I was trying to be kind, because I thought kindness would make them see me as family. But people who see kindness as weakness do not become grateful. They become hungry. 4. The betrayal. The first real betrayal happened on a rainy Wednesday in March. I came home from work at 6:18 p.m. with a headache, wet shoes, and a bag of groceries cutting red lines into my fingers. There was a white SUV in the driveway. Diane's. Inside I heard voices. Not casual voices. Planning voices. I pushed open the door and found Diane, Mark, Evan, and a woman I did not know standing in my living room with paint swatches spread across the coffee table. The stranger had a clipboard. Diane was pointing at the wall behind the fireplace. This one should come down, she said. It closes the room off. My keys were still in my hand. What's going on? Everyone turned. Mark looked guilty for half a second, then covered it with a smile. Hey, he said. You're home early. I'm home at the same time I'm home every day. Diane waved a hand. We're just getting ideas. The woman with the clipboard smiled brightly. I'm Karen from Bell and Crest Interiors. Diane said she was considering a refresh before moving in. The grocery bag slipped slightly in my hand. Moving in, I said. Mark stood quickly. It's not decided. Diane folded her arms. It has to be discussed. Discussed with who? With the family, she said. I looked around the room. My husband. His mother. His brother. A designer. Apparently, the family had met without me. I set the groceries on the floor because my hands were starting to shake. Karen, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I'm sorry, but there has been a misunderstanding. This house is not being redesigned. The designer's smile faltered. Oh. Diane's face hardened. Mark rubbed his forehead. Amelia, don't be rude. Rude. That word snapped something inside me. I came home to strangers planning renovations in my living room. And I'm rude? Evan laughed under his breath. Here we go. Diane turned toward Karen. Could you give us a minute? The designer gathered her samples and left so quickly she forgot one beige swatch on the couch. As soon as the front door closed, Diane's voice changed. You have made this family walk on eggshells long enough. I stared at her. What? She stepped closer. My son has lived here for years. He pays bills here. He fixes things here. This is his home too. I never said it wasn't his home. You made sure it wasn't his house. The room went quiet. Mark looked away. That was when I knew they had talked about this before. Not once. Many times. Diane continued. A wife who truly loves her husband does not keep one foot on his neck with paperwork. I felt my face go hot. Paperwork. The deed, she said like it was a dirty word. I looked at Mark. You discussed my deed with your mother? He did not answer. Diane did. You are not the only person with needs, Amelia. I'm 62 years old. Rent has gone up twice. My son wants to take care of me. Then he can help you find a place, I said. He cannot give you mine. Diane's eyes narrowed. Then she said the sentence I never forgot. You live here because my son allows it to feel like a marriage. The silence after that was thick enough to choke on. I looked at Mark. Waited. He swallowed. Mom, he said weakly. Not. Don't speak to my wife that way. Not. This is Amelia's home. Just, Mom. Diane knew she had won that moment. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Think carefully, she said to me. Selfish women end up alone. After she left, rain tapped against the windows. Mark and I stood in the living room with the abandoned paint swatch between us. I asked him, do you believe that? He sighed. I believe my mother needs help. That's not what I asked. He looked exhausted, irritated, cornered. Finally, he said, I believe you hold this house over me more than you realize. I felt something inside me fold in half. I never held it over you. You don't have to say it, he said. It's always there. No, Mark. It's there because it's my home. He looked at me then, coldly. And maybe that's the problem. 5. The moment I stopped begging. After that night the house changed. Not physically at first. The walls were still sage green. The lavender still lined the path. The maple tree still dropped small red buds onto the porch. But the air inside felt different. Like someone had opened a door and let a stranger in. Mark stopped asking before inviting Diane over. She started arriving with grocery bags, laundry, framed photos, and opinions. She rearranged my pantry. She moved Grandma Ruth's recipe box from the counter to a cabinet, because, as she put it, clutter attracts sadness. When I moved it back, she told Mark I was being territorial. That word became their favorite. Territorial. I was territorial about my kitchen, territorial about my bedroom, territorial about the garage, territorial about the front garden I had planted with my own blistered hands. One afternoon, I came home and found Diane's china in my dining room cabinet. Called Mark at work. Why is your mother's china here? She's downsizing. Why is it in my cabinet? Our cabinet, he said. I closed my eyes. There it was again. That slow theft of language. My became our became his became hers. 2 weeks later, Diane added me to a family group chat called Mercer Home Transition. I stared at the screen confused. There were 13 people in it. Diane had sent a photo of my front porch with the caption, starting fresh soon. God is good. Mark replied with a thumbs up. Evan replied, guest room better be mine. I typed deleted then typed again. There is no home transition. Please stop discussing my house like this. For 30 seconds no one responded. Then Diane wrote, this attitude is exactly why Mark is doing what he has to do legally. Legally. My stomach dropped. I walked into the hallway where Mark was taking off his shoes. What does your mother mean by legally? He looked at the phone in my hand, then at my face. She's emotional. What does she mean? He tossed his keys into the bowl. I spoke to someone about marital property. The hallway seemed to tilt. You did what? I had questions. About taking my house? His jaw tightened. About protecting myself. From me. From being erased, he snapped. I actually took a step back. He had never yelled like that before. Then he lowered his voice. You don't understand what it feels like to live somewhere that never really becomes yours. I wanted to say, yes, I do. I wanted to tell him that was how I had felt my whole childhood. Like every place could vanish if I disappointed the wrong person. But he was not listening for my pain. He was using his pain as a weapon. That weekend I found a locksmith's business card on the kitchen counter. When I asked, Mark said, "Mom worries about security." "Why would your mother need to worry about security in my house?" He stared at me for a long second, then said, "You really can't help yourself, can you?" The next morning my key stuck in the front lock. For one terrifying second it would not turn. I stood on the porch in my scrubs at 7:06 a.m., my coffee going cold in my hand, thinking he had done it. He had changed the locks. Then the key caught and the door opened. But that moment stayed with me. That flash of fear. That possibility. That was the moment I stopped begging him to understand. I called in sick for the first time in 11 months. Then I drove to my bank and asked for copies of every mortgage payment record since before my marriage. I called the county recorder's office. I called my grandmother's old estate attorney. And finally, I called a lawyer named Marachan. Mara's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and butter. She was in her 50s, calm, silver-haired, with glasses on a chain and the kind of eyes that made people tell the truth quickly. I sat across from her and placed a folder on her desk. "My husband thinks he can give my house to his mother," I said. Mara did not laugh. She opened the folder. For 20 minutes she read in silence. The silence in that room was different from Mark's silence. Mark's silence abandoned me. Mara's silence made space. Finally she looked up. "Did your husband contribute to the down payment?" "No." "Is his name on the deed?" "No." "Did you refinance during the marriage and add him?" "No." "Do you have a prenuptial agreement?" "Yes." Her eyebrow lifted. I slid the contract across the desk. Mark had signed it 3 weeks before our wedding. Diane hated it. She called it a divorce invitation. Mark told me he understood. He said he wanted me to feel safe. Mara read the prenup twice. Then she leaned back. "Amelia," she said, "your husband cannot gift what he does not own." My throat tightened. I had known that. But hearing it from someone with law books behind her made my lungs work again. "What do I do?" Mara closed the folder gently. "First, you stop arguing with people who benefit from pretending not to understand. Second, we document everything. Third, if they create a public lie, we answer it with public truth." I wiped my eyes quickly, embarrassed. Mara pretended not to notice. Then she said something I carried with me through everything that came next. "Quiet is not weakness when you are gathering proof." So I got quiet. Mark thought it meant I was giving in. Diane thought it meant I was scared. The family group chat thought it meant I had been humbled. But by the time they realized I was quiet, it was already too late. 6. What they didn't know. What they did not know was that Diane had made one mistake every controlling person eventually makes. She got comfortable being watched. My front porch camera had recorded every time she came by when I was not home. The kitchen camera, which Mark knew about but always forgot, recorded her telling Evan, "Once I'm in, Amelia won't last 6 months." The hallway camera caught Mark letting her photograph my filing cabinet. The family group chat gave me screenshots. The bank gave me statements. The county gave me certified copies of the deed. Mara requested documents showing the house had been purchased before marriage, with separate funds, protected by a prenup Mark had signed willingly with his own independent attorney present. Every lie they told created another receipt. Every message became a thread. Every threat became a timestamp. Still, I did not reveal what I had. Not yet, because Diane was planning something bigger. I found out from Evan accidentally. He texted the wrong group chat one Thursday afternoon. "Mom wants the announcement at her birthday dinner. Says it'll pressure Amelia to behave." Then 3 seconds later. Wrong chat. Ignore. I stared at my phone. My pulse slowed. Not raced. Slowed. Because suddenly I understood their plan. Diane's birthday was in 2 weeks. She had rented the private room at a restaurant called the Alder Room, the kind of place with white tablecloths, dark wood, and servers who refilled water before you noticed the glass was empty. 40 people were invited. Family, church friends, Evan's investors, Mark's boss, 2 of Diane's neighbors, people whose opinions mattered to her. The invitation said, "Celebrating Diane's new chapter." New chapter. I showed Mara the message. She read it once and said, "Good." I blinked. "Good. If they want a public performance," she said, "we can make sure the record is present." I was not brave every day. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor with the shower running so Mark would not hear me cry. There were mornings I looked at him making coffee in the kitchen and remembered the man who brought me used books and held my hand on hard anniversaries. Grief is strange when the person is still alive. You mourn who they were before they show you who they are. One night I found Mark in the reading room, staring at Grandma Ruth's photo. For a moment he looked ashamed. I stood in the doorway. "Do you remember what you said when you moved in?" I asked. He did not turn. "What?" "You said you didn't want me to feel like you were taking over." His shoulders tightened. "I was trying to be respectful. Were you lying?" He turned then and his face was tired. "I was trying to be the kind of man you wanted." That sentence hurt because it almost sounded honest. Then he added, "But you made it impossible." There it was. The hook beneath the softness. I whispered, "I loved you." He looked away. "You loved control." I walked out before I said something I could not take back. The next day Mara filed a notice through her office. Not yet a lawsuit but a formal warning. Any attempt to transfer, lease, alter occupancy, encumber, or misrepresent ownership of the property would be met with immediate legal action. Mark received the letter at work. He came home furious. "You got a lawyer?" I was standing at the stove stirring soup I no longer wanted. "Yes." He slammed the letter on the counter. "You're making my mother look like a criminal." "No," I said. "She's doing that herself." His face changed. For the first time I saw fear under the anger. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the story he had been telling. He stepped closer. "You will not embarrass us at my mother's birthday." I turned off the stove. "Then don't lie." His mouth opened then closed. That silence was the second crack. The birthday dinner arrived 6 days later. I wore a black dress, low heels, and Grandma Ruth's small silver locket under the neckline where nobody could see it. Inside my purse was nothing dramatic. No speech. No printed stack of papers. No hidden recorder. Just my phone. Because Mara had everything else. She would arrive only if needed. That was the plan. I remember looking at my house before we left. The porch light was on. The lavender had started blooming. Through the window I could see the yellow chair in the reading room. For weeks I had feared losing it. But standing there I realized the house had never needed me to scream for it. The truth was already written. It had been recorded years before Mark decided feelings could overwrite signatures. By the time we reached the alder room, Mark had convinced himself I would stay quiet. Diane had convinced herself I was defeated. And every person in that room was about to learn that confidence is very expensive when it is built on a lie. 7. The reveal. The alder room smelled like rosemary, wine, and expensive perfume. Diane had chosen the largest private dining space, the one with velvet curtains and a long table under brass lights. There were white roses in glass vases and little place cards written in gold ink. Mine was at the far end. Not beside Mark. Not near Diane. At the far end, next to Evan's girlfriend, who spent most of dinner scrolling through her phone under the table. Mark sat beside his mother. Of course he did. Diane wore cream silk and the same pearl necklace from the night at my house. She looked radiant. Not happy exactly. Victorious. Throughout dinner she kept touching Mark's arm. "My good son," she said whenever someone praised him. "My responsible son. My son who never forgets family." Each phrase landed on me like a small stone. Evan stood halfway through the meal and gave a toast about sacrifice, though I had never seen him sacrifice anything except other people's patience. "Mom has always put family first," he said. "And now Mark is making sure family puts her first." People clapped. Mark smiled. I watched Diane look around the room, measuring everyone's attention. She needed witnesses. That was the point. She did not just want my house. She wanted an audience for my surrender. After dessert plates were cleared, Diane tapped her knife lightly against her glass. The room quieted. "Well," she said, smiling, "I am overwhelmed tonight. Truly. 62 sounds old until you realize life can still surprise you." Soft laughter. She dabbed at her eyes. "For years I lived modestly. I made do. I sacrificed. I raised 2 boys by myself after their father left, and I never asked for much." That was not true. Diane asked for everything. She just called it love. "But recently," she continued, My son Mark came to me with a gift so generous I could hardly accept it. My stomach tightened. Mark looked down at his plate. "Stand up, sweetheart," Diane said to him. He stood. She reached for his hand. "Mark and Amelia have decided to give me their home." A ripple moved through the room. Some people gasped. Some smiled. Someone said, "Oh, Diane." She continued quickly. "It is the blue house on Cedar Hollow Lane. Many of you have been there. It has been such a blessing to them, and now it will become a blessing to me." My ears rang. She said it like the matter was finished, like I was furniture already being moved out. Diane turned toward me. "Amelia, dear, I know change is hard for you, but I hope one day you will understand that family requires sacrifice." The room turned. Every face moved toward me. This was the moment they wanted. The public pressure. The humiliation. The trap. If I cried, I was unstable. If I yelled, I was selfish. If I left, I was guilty. So I did none of those things. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and stood. The room went very quiet. Even the servers stopped moving near the wall. I looked at Diane first, then Mark, then the people who had smiled while watching my life be handed away. "I have one question," I said. Diane's smile tightened. "Of course." I looked at Mark. "What exactly did you give her?" His face flushed. "Amelia." "No," I said calmly. "You announced it. I'm asking what you gave." Diane laughed lightly. "Oh, sweetheart, this is not the time for technicalities." The deed is not a technicality. A few people shifted in their seats. Mark's boss, a man named Grant, leaned back slowly. Diane's eyes sharpened. "Mark is your husband?" "Yes," I said. "He is." "For now," Evan muttered. A few people laughed nervously. I looked at him. "Thank you, Evan. That might be the first accurate legal prediction anyone in this family has made." The laughter died immediately. Diane's cheeks turned pink. Mark stepped toward me. "You need to sit down." I looked at his hand before he could touch my arm. He stopped. That small pause told the room more than I could have. I took out my phone. Diane's voice hardened. "What are you doing?" "Calling my lawyer." The word lawyer changed the air. It moved through the room like a draft under a locked door. Mark whispered, "Don't." But my finger had already pressed Mara's contact. She answered on the second ring. "Amelia." "It's time," I said. Then I put the phone on speaker. Diane's face changed completely. The softness vanished. "Is this some kind of stunt?" Mara's voice came through clear and calm. "Mrs. Mercer, this is Mara-chan, attorney for Amelia Hart. I am downstairs with certified copies of the relevant documents. With your permission, Amelia, I'll join you now." I said, "Please do." No one spoke for the next 43 seconds. I know because I watched the second hand on the wall clock. 43 seconds of forks suspended above plates. 43 seconds of Diane blinking too fast. 43 seconds of Mark staring at the floor. Then the private room door opened. Mara walked in wearing a charcoal coat and carrying a leather folder. She did not rush. She did not perform. She moved like truth had all the time in the world. Diane found her voice first. "This is a family dinner." Mara looked at her. It became a legal matter when false claims of property transfer were announced in front of witnesses. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mara placed the folder on the table. "I'll be brief." Mark stepped forward. "Mara, this isn't necessary." She looked at him. "Mr. Mercer, you were sent written notice 6 days ago instructing you not to misrepresent ownership of Mrs. Hart's property. You appear to have ignored that notice." The room shifted again. "Mrs. Hart?" Grant asked from the table. Mara nodded. "Yes. The property at Cedar Hollow Lane is owned solely by Amelia Hart. Purchased before marriage. Down payment funded by separate premarital assets and inheritance. Mortgage paid from her individual account. Protected by a prenuptial agreement signed by Mr. Mercer before the wedding." Diane whispered, "That's private." "No," Mara said. "The deed is public record. The lie was private until you made it public." That was the first moment of shock. True shock. Diane's hand gripped the back of her chair. Evan said, "Wait, Mark's not on the house at all?" Mara opened the folder and slid a certified copy of the deed onto the table. "No. The paper looked so ordinary for something that powerful. White pages. Black ink. A county seal. My name. Only my name. Mara continued. Mr. Mercer does not own the house. He cannot gift it, sell it, lease it, transfer it, or promise occupancy rights to anyone. Diane's face went pale. Mark tried to laugh. Came out broken. Okay, but I live there. I'm her husband. That has to mean something. It means you were permitted to reside there as her spouse, Mara said. It does not make you an owner. Diane snapped. He paid bills. Mara turned a page. Utilities. Groceries. Minor household expenses. Not the down payment, not the mortgage, not property taxes, not insurance, not renovations. Those records are here. The room was silent. Not polite silent. Devastated silent. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they clapped for the wrong person. Diane looked at me then. For the first time all night she looked afraid. Not sorry. Afraid. She said, Amelia, you didn't have to humiliate me. I almost smiled. You announced you were taking my home in front of 40 people. Her lips trembled. I was trusting my son. No, I said. You were using him. Mark flinched. Diane's eyes filled with tears again, but this time nobody rushed to comfort her. Mara placed another document on the table. There is also video evidence of Mrs. Mercer entering the property without Amelia present, discussing removal of Amelia from the home, and photographing private documents. There are group chat screenshots misrepresenting a property transfer. If this continues, we will pursue a restraining order, civil claims, and any applicable criminal complaints. Evan's girlfriend slowly put her phone face down. Evan stared at his mother. You said she agreed. Diane snapped. Stay out of this. But it was too late. The room had turned. A church friend near the end of the table whispered, Diane. Mark looked at me then with wet eyes. Amelia, please. We can talk about this at home. I stared at him. At home. The audacity of that word. For weeks he had treated my home like a prize to be awarded to his mother. Now that the truth had arrived, he wanted shelter inside it. I shook my head. No, Mark. He took a step toward me. I made a mistake. No, I said. You made a plan. His face crumpled. Diane began to cry harder. This is cruel, she said. And that was when I finally said the line I had been holding back since the night she stood in my kitchen and told me I lived there because her son allowed it. I looked at her and said, You did not lose a house tonight, Diane. You lost access to a woman you thought was too desperate to defend herself. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Mara closed the folder. Amelia, she said gently, are you ready to leave? Picked up my purse. Mark reached for my wrist. Mara's voice cut through the room. Do not touch my client. He froze. The room watched him choose. For once in his life, Mark had to decide who he was without his mother speaking for him. He lowered his hand, and I walked out. Not quickly. Not dramatically. I walked out with my grandmother's locket against my skin, my lawyer beside me, and 40 witnesses behind me realizing the truth had never been missing. They just never thought I would bring receipts. 8. The fallout. By morning, the family group chat had gone silent. Not deleted. Silent. That mattered more. People who had spent weeks typing opinions suddenly had nothing to say. At 8:12 a.m., Diane posted a vague Facebook status about being betrayed by someone she welcomed as a daughter. By 9:33, relatives had called me. By noon, the post was gone. Not because Diane felt guilty. Because someone from the birthday dinner had commented, Diane, the deed had Amelia's name only. This is not the version you told us. That comment had 16 likes before Diane deleted the whole thing. The story did not exactly go viral, but in Diane's world it might as well have. Her church friends knew. Her garden club knew. Evan's investors knew. Mark's boss knew. The image she had built for decades cracked in one night. Mara sent formal letters to Diane and Evan banning them from entering my property. She sent Mark a separate notice, giving him 14 days to remove his personal belongings under supervision. I changed the locks legally. This time I was the one holding the receipt. Mark stayed with Diane at first, then with Evan, then in a short-term rental near his office. He called me 27 times in 3 days. I answered once. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Amelia, he said. I know I hurt you. I sat in the reading room with Grandma Ruth's photo on the table beside me. You betrayed me. He breathed shakily. I was under pressure. No, I said. You were offered a choice. He went quiet. Then he said the thing that proved he still did not understand. Can we at least not make this a divorce? I looked around the room. The yellow chair. The bookshelves. The lavender outside the window. The home I had nearly begged to be allowed to keep. And I said, Mark, our marriage ended the moment you tried to give away my safety to earn your mother's approval. He cried then. I did too. But I did not change my mind. A month later, Mara filed for divorce. Because of the prenup, the house remained separate property. Mark tried to argue emotional contribution. His attorney dropped that argument after seeing the documents, messages, and security footage. Diane never apologized. She sent one letter through Mark's aunt. It said, I hope one day Amelia understands what it means to be family. I folded it once and gave it to Mara. Evan apologized by text. Not a real apology. More of a survival apology. I didn't know Mom was lying about the deed. Sorry, things got weird. Weird. That was his word for attempted property theft, public humiliation, and weeks of emotional abuse. I did not respond. Some relatives did apologize properly. Mark's Aunt Linda called and cried. I clapped, she said. I clapped when Diane said it. I didn't even look at your face. I am ashamed. That one hurt in a different way. Because she meant it. I told her. Thank you for saying that. I did not tell her everything was fine. Because it was not. The fallout was not just legal. It was physical. For weeks, my body behaved like the danger was still inside the house. Every time a car slowed outside, I looked through the curtain. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. Every time the lock clicked, I held my breath. Betrayal does not end when the villain is exposed. Sometimes exposure is just the first day your body realizes it is allowed to collapse. I started therapy again. I replaced the dining room cabinet Diane had filled with her china. I moved Grandma Ruth's recipe box back to the counter. I repainted the hallway Diane once called gloomy, a deep warm blue. Mark came once with a moving company and a court-approved schedule. He looked older, tired. He packed his sweaters, his books, and the espresso machine he had bought but never cleaned. Before leaving, he stood in the doorway of the reading room. I did love you, he said. I believed him. That was the hardest part. I know, I said. His eyes filled. But you loved being chosen by your mother more. He did not argue. For the first time, he had no translation ready. No excuse. No softer version. Just silence. Then he left. And when the door closed behind him, the house felt still. Not empty. Still. There is a difference.